How Mitakuyepi. Hello, everyone. I would like to talk about the orthography that I use when I teach Lakota. And this is the same orthography that I use in my books, too. And I want to give you a history on that. And orthography is how you mark letters so that it tells you what sound it makes. Okay? Um, Long time ago, when the reservation period was starting and there were some linguists that were non-native, they would visit the reservations and they would learn our language. But the thing is, each of these linguists, they developed their own way to write the language. And so you ended up with several systems of writing our language. So some linguist might say, well, Lakota people have 37 sounds. Another one might say, no, that's incorrect. They have 31. Another one might say, no, both of you are incorrect. They have 29 sounds. And so they all are in disagreement, which is, I find interesting. Yeah. Look at the difference, 37, 31, and 29. That's and these are non-Indians, yeah? And they're telling the world how many sounds we have. Well, in the 1980s, there were elders from the 5 Lakota-speaking reservations, which are in South Dakota, and they are Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, Rosebud Sioux Tribe, Lower Brule Sioux Tribe, Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and Pine Ridge Sioux Tribe. They had elders from these reservations. They met several times and they were deciding, hey, we have to decide how our language is going to continue on. While we're still here, we need to do something for our young ones, our descendants, for our people. And so the first thing they did was they looked at all these orthographies that were created by these non-native linguists. They went through all of them and they thought, well, they all disagree. So let's find out how many sounds do we have? So they would talk amongst themselves and say things like, well, how do you guys say this? Yeah, because in the Lakota people, there are 7 major groups of Lakota people, of Lakota speakers. 4 of those groups live on Cheyenne River, and one group lives on Rosebud Sioux Reservation and Lower Brule Sioux Reservation. So that's 5. And then another one lives on Pine Ridge, so that's 6. And another one lives on Standing Rock. So that's how the 7 are divided on the reservations today. So everybody might have a little different flavor. It's the same language, okay? But there might be a little different flavor. And that's good because that's like your passport, your identification, that tells people where you're from. And that's cool. So they were meeting and asking each other, how do you guys say this and so forth? And then they would write this down. There were no computers at that time, so they were writing this down on these flip charts kind of thing. And after the dust cleared, they came up with the conclusion that we have 40 sounds in the Lakota language. And now they were deciding, well, how should we write those sounds? And a lot of these elders, they're survivors of boarding school times where it was against the law to speak the language. You got tortured if you spoke the language, but they spoke in private, amongst themselves. And so they're really determined to save the language. And so they thought, okay, well, to develop a whole different system, our children, our grandchildren are having enough difficulty in school. And we don't want to make it more difficult by, introducing a whole different way of using symbols with arrows and Z's and circles and all that kind of thing. So they thought, okay, to make it as less stress-free as possible, they will just continue to use the ABCs. And so, the alphabet has 26 letters, but 6 of those letters, those sounds do not exist in Lakota. So that leaves 20 letters to use, but there's 40 sounds. So then they were thinking, well, how are we going to mark these letters to indicate these other sounds? Because some of the sounds are gutturals, that they really have a rough sound, like which is a H guttural. So how do we mark that? Yeah. So they came up with this system that is really cool. And they wanted to continue their meetings and continue to develop, a course. But see, these meetings were sponsored by the tribal councils from the 5 reservations. And these councils, they didn't want to do that anymore. They didn't want to sponsor these meetings. And it's kind of sad. You think about it, because that's our government. But obviously, they don't see our language as being important. Well, that's another topic. Yeah, the tribal councils are the worst enemy of our people. I won't get into that, but that's another discussion. So those notes just stayed at Sintegleshka University on Rosebud Sioux Reservation. And then comes a teacher named Albert Whitehat Sr., who is my mentor. And when he became a teacher, he was thinking, well, how do I write the language? And then he remembered these notes, so he looked at them and he took that system that these old people created of writing our language. And that's what he used in his courses and his book, Reading and Writing the Lakota Language, which I do recommend. It's a good book. And Albert brings in the culture too. And that's important, yeah, because language and culture, they go together. You can't have one without the other. They both need to be there. And a lot of courses, they only teach the language. And that's not good, because you'll end up saying things that Lakota people never said. For example, good morning. We never said that. But today you have people saying, hihani washte. This is incorrect. Okay? When you talk Lakota, you want your words to embrace that person. So in the morning, people might say, hihani kile lila tayanwa chionke, which means it's really nice to see you this morning. You see that? How warm that is? Makes that person feel good. Even if they're in a bad mood, it alters that a little bit. It's a nice feeling. That's how you speak Lakota. You don't just say good morning. That's cold. See, that's what I mean. When you speak the language, you gotta speak through the perspective of the people. So when I began teaching, as I was developing my courses, I thought, I think I'll use what Albert is using, but then there were some symbols that I disagreed with. And one of them was putting the dot over a letter to indicate a guttural. A guttural is really a rough sound. Like in the word Lakota, you hear that K with the dot, like that. Lakota. Yeah, you put a dot over the K. Well, this other orthography that was developed by these old Lakota people, when they wanted to say the word sha, they use a S and put a dot over it to indicate the sh sound. But to me, that's not a rough sound. It's a smooth sound. Yeah? Shh. So instead of using a dot, I use a circle. And another one is the C. And what Albert uses, which again comes from these elders, they put a dot over the C to get the ch sound, like in chair. But again, to me, that doesn't sound like a guttural, these really hard sounds. So I put a C over the circle. And that's how I make the ch sound. So the orthography that I use is very similar to what Albert Whitehat Sr. uses. And it's both originating from this system that was created by these old people. So that's why I use this system. So I'm going to put on the screen the Lakota alphabet. So that's how I come to use this system of writing the letters that I use. I invite you to come visit my website at wolakota7.com. You can see the address on the screen, and here you can learn about the books that I've written and also some of the services that I offer. For example, spiritual consultation and Lakota language lessons. And you can see the books that I wrote, and one of them, called Kea and Matho Stonehearts, I wrote with my wife. And if you would like to order these books or order any of my services, you can see all the information on the screen. And for more questions, please write to me at the email address that you see at the bottom right of the screen. Oh, Lila Pila Maelo. Thank you very much.